For some reason, my wife won't let me make furniture using walnut for our house. It doesn't fit the interior design, she says. Jag tänkte att jag skulle göra ett bord i walnut. Vad tycker du om det?
Nej.
So I thought, what if I made her something really nice out of walnut and maybe it can change her mind. And let's see if she wants to keep it. Så jag har gjort en grej till dig. It isn't uncommon that I come up with ideas in the shower. It's something in the shower that makes me think creatively. I doubt it's my naked body. You should try it out. I mean, thinking in the shower. So what I came up with in the shower was a toolbox for her random junk. I mean, who doesn't like having a wooden toolbox? Especially in walnut. There was just one problem. I didn't have a design for it, and this needs to have some thought behind it if I'm gonna make her love it, despite the walnut. So I had to start by doing a design all from scratch, and I realized that she does enjoy old stuff. So I thought, I have made hand-cut dovetails in the past, but I don't have time to practice it again, so I remembered that I bought a dovetail jig in the past. The only problem was that I had no idea how to use it. And I thought, how hard can it be? So I opened up the box and took all the parts out, and I realized that I didn't have a clue. And the manual seemed to be written by a child. So I had to spend some time on the YouTube University trying to learn how it works. I figured it would still be a lot quicker than doing hand-cut dovetails. But I'm not sure I was right. When I had my brain filled with YouTube content on dovetail jigs, I started by trying it out on some MDF to get a hang of it. The jig wasn't expensive, and the main basics of it is that you just align your workpieces and have the router cut both the tail and the pin at the same time. I did try it out, but I soon realized this is not gonna work. So I knew I had to come up with a different plan. I didn't have time to figure this thing out to make it perfect. So then I thought, what if I don't do dovetails and just do half lap joints instead? And then I remembered an old project of mine where I used patterned plywood to make up for a lid for a box that I did. And I thought Michael Alm has some really nice videos on different types of patterns. So I went back to YouTube and watched a lot of his videos on making patterned plywood, and then I decided to go for that for the lid. In order to make my life easier, I printed a cut list for all the pieces I would need. Since I had my drawing in CAD, it was easy laying everything out and have it printed onto paper. And if you want to get the plans for this box, I have links down in the description of the video. I was ready to start working on the walnut, and I had 2 large pieces of wood that needed milling and prepping before they were ready to be worked with. So I started doing all of that. Milling, resawing, planing, cutting until I had all the pieces I needed to make the box. I'm not going to show you any more of that process because I get bored even editing the part where I'm doing all of that. I actually fall asleep most of the time. But what I can say is that I prefer doing all the milling over a couple of days to prevent the wood from bending, warping, cupping, whatever the word is, during the milling process. I had all the pieces needed for the project in a pile, cut to size and almost ready to get assembled. I started by cutting all the pieces for the bottom of the box with the table saw. It's just a lot of repetitive cuts. In and out, in and out. Not like that. I used the miter saw to cut the pieces to length, and then I could start working on the half lap joints by cutting them out on the table saw with a flat tooth blade. And because I wanted the bottom of the box to sit inside the dados in the side pieces, I had them cut as well. In other words, basically what I did was make all the pieces for a box without a lid, with a bottom piece that sits flush with the bottom. And that involves words like rabbit, not the animal, and dados, not the food. It might not look it, but it's therapy cutting all the pieces to size. I have a sacrificial fence on the table saw to be able to cut all the way to the edge on my pieces. Then I could do a quick dry fit to see that it would all fit together, which it did. Nice and snug. Compact. Cramped. Before I glued the box together, I needed to make the handle, and I had a template printed from the design I'd made. If you want to download the drawing, I'll have that available down in the description, said the YouTuber. I attached the templates with spray glue because it smells better than paper glue, and then I had it roughly cut to size with a bandsaw, and then I shaped it according to the template on the belt sander. To cut out for the handle, I drilled 2 holes with a Forstner bit and then I used a jigsaw to cut out the rest. But if you don't have these tools, you can just use your CNC. Then I shaped the inside of the handle with the spindle sander. And I also gave it a nice round over with the palm router. Before I started assembling the bottom, I decided to engrave it with a short message. That way it'll be hard for her to give it away to someone else. I'm sneaky that way. I had another template printed of where to place the holes for the screws in the handle. I pre-drilled the holes, but here came my first mistake. I attached brass screws. It's a nice contrast to walnut. But they broke off because I was lazy and I didn't do what I usually do. Attach a regular wood screw first, then take that out and put the brass screw in. I got pissed and replaced them with black screws off camera after doing a proper woodsectomy, getting the brass out. Then I had these short strips cut on the table saw. They are supports that go on the inside of the box to hold the drawer that is going inside. When that was done, I had all the pieces for the bottom of the toolbox, so I started the assembly. I glued the strips onto the side pieces with glue and some super glue and the activator to act as clamps while the glue dried. Just because I've seen other people do that. It's like I have no will of my own. Then I could go on and glue the rest of the box up. Oops, wrong channel. When the glue was drying, I started working on the patterned plywood. I had the table saw set to about 1/2 inch and I started cutting plywood strips. Still not the food. Then I glued them together. The trick is to use a lot of glue here. The plywood eats wood glue for dinner. Then I had them glued up in a 45-degree angle. And then it was back to the table saw to cut the rest of the pieces for the drawer and the top of the toolbox. Same procedure as last time. Table saw, ooh, fancy old DeWalt table saw. Miter saw, brand new one from Bosch, emptied my wallet. Change blade on the table saw, because I can. Measure for correct height on the blade for the dados. Measure the correct distance to the fence and start cutting. To be honest, I have no idea what I'm talking about when I'm mentioning rabbits and dados, but I hope you get what I'm doing here. It's like a recipe for some fine dining food where you just follow a recipe but you don't know half the ingredients. For the drawer and the lid, I needed to cut a hole in the middle to have the handle slide over. So I used a combination of a Forstner bit and the jigsaw to cut that out. I didn't really like how that turned out, so later I came up with a better idea for the lid. The teeth of the jigsaw leaves nasty marks and it isn't super accurate. At least not in my hands. I glued the drawer up and then I could continue working on the patterned plywood. I unclamped it and used the track saw to cut a 45-degree angle cut to have a reference for the table saw where I'll be cutting the rest of the pieces in the same angle. I cut the pieces around 2 centimeters wide on the table saw, but any size will do. It affects the size of the pattern, that's all. I must say there's something really rewarding with patterned plywood, but then again there is to eating crap food as well. But I had no idea at this point if my wife would like the addition or not. And when all the pieces were cut, it was back to gluing them up into the final pattern. I made sure to align them as best as I could to minimize the amount of sanding I had to do later. Then I could have it cut to size and also had the rabbit cut on the lid because I wanted it to sit flush with the top of the box. See, I used the word again. Then I drilled a hole for the handle. This time I used the Forstner bit and a jigsaw, same as the last time, but I did the last part with the router and a flush trim bit. I just had a guide piece of wood taped to the plywood, and that meant less work sanding than just cutting with the jigsaw. Then I chiseled out the rest and I was ready for the last glue up. I did some hand sanding where it was needed, but I also made a chamfer on the bottom and the top of the box. It's just a really small detail, but I think it does a lot to the final result. In this case, it would be good to have some kind of support for the router because it wobbles a bit. But it didn't really affect the chamfer, so I kept going. On the lid, it was well supported as it was flat. Before finishing, I did a quick assembly test and everything seemed perfect. I sanded the entire thing and finished it with Rubio Monocoat Oil Plus 2C Pure. The pattern plywood will yellow a bit more than I want, but an option would be to add a lighter finish to the plywood before assembly or just tape it off. And then there it was, a new toolbox in walnut with a pattern plywood lid. So I took it with me and went inside to show my wife. This was the moment I had waited for. Could I convince her to like walnut? Så jag har gjort en grej till dig. Nu får du titta.
Oj! Wow! Oj, vad fin den var. Så gjort den till mig.
Ja.
Gud vad fin den var.
Så gillar du walnut nu?
Jag kommer aldrig gilla valnöt, men jag kommer gilla den här.